I start the book on my 50th birthday and looking back on my life and how everything that I had done and how I felt on that day, which I'm sure many people have shared. Well, to start with, to tell you a little bit about myself, is that I have always been obsessed with Egypt. As a child, I was obsessed with Egypt. I had a card table in my bedroom on which I put a whole lot of sand and blue cellophane paper for the Nile, and Mum made figures out of wooden pegs and cut up one of Dad's striped pajamas to clothe them, and I'd pretend I was in Egypt all the time. That was as a child. Then as a teenager, that developed even more. I became very interested in the historical side of ancient Egypt. So I've always had this strong feeling for Egypt, and I've also had a very strong feeling for the Native American Indians and their philosophies and spiritual teachings. And so I loved all that and sort of imagined myself going to all these wonderful places. But what actually happened in my life was very different. Before I was married, and my mother had saved enough money to go to Europe to visit some friends in Europe, and she asked me would I like to go with her. It was 1963 and I was 23, and on the way to Europe there was a stopover at Port Said, and where there was a whole day stopover, and if we wanted to we could catch a bus to the pyramids. So of course I went with Mum, and that was my first taste of Egypt, and I felt as if I was coming home. I certainly didn't want to leave, but of course I had to at the end of the day because we had to continue on to Europe. But it changed my life in a way because I felt that was where I should be living. That was my everything to do with me. I was Egyptian, not Australian. That was that, and I came back, and very briefly, this was the rest of my life. I got married. I had 3 children. Then my husband left me for somebody else, so I had to bring up the 3 children by myself. So I was working very hard. I had originally been a school teacher, and then I became trained in hypnotherapy, and I became a clinical hypnotherapist. And I was working very hard, and I was bringing up my 3 children. Plus, my sister lived next door with her child, and my sister developed schizophrenia, kept going off her medication, so I had to do a lot of work in trying to help her and care for her. And it all became too much, so I had to take on the care of my little nephew as well. So he lived with my children, and then he developed schizophrenia, and time went by. My kids all became very successful actors, so they were lucky in that happened. But then the next thing that happened was that my nephew took his life. He didn't take his medication, and he said the voices in his head said that if he took his life, there'd be immediate world peace. And he believed the voices in his head, and I won't tell you the details, but he took his life. And 8 weeks after that, my sister went as well. So then within about a couple of months, my father died, and I was left with trying to look after my kids, working hard, caring. Son had then developed bipolar disorder. And so I was looking after him, and then I was living in Sydney, and I was flying to Melbourne most weekends to care for my mother as well, because she was still suffering very much from Dad dying and the loss of her daughter, of course, my sister and great-grandson and so on. So my life had become pretty hectic. It was spent working hard, travelling to look after Mum, looking after my son, who was very ill, in and out of hospital. And so by the time my 50th birthday came, I realised that's all my life had been about. It had been working flat out, looking after everybody, working hard to earn the money to be able to keep flying down to Melbourne to Mum and so on. And I felt as if I was a complete failure. I'd failed in life completely. And then a friend of mine who had just come back from America gave me a tape to listen to. Back in those days, it was cassettes. I listened to this. She said, listen to this guy and see what he says. Listen to what he says. You can change your life somehow. And the words were, and I wrote them down so I could give you the exact words. The words were, whatever excites you is what you're meant to be doing. Follow your excitement and you'll be following your soul purpose. Excitement is a signal that you're on the right path. Follow your excitement and manifest your dreams. Make a list of what excites you and do it. So I I I felt excited just reading that because I was on my own on my 50th birthday. One daughter was in Queensland doing a television show called Pacific Drive. The other daughter was in Melbourne doing a television show called Neighbours. My son was in hospital, and I was alone on my 50th birthday, just staying in bed. So when I read that about following excitement, I made a list of what excited me the most. And at the top, of course, was going to Egypt. So I put going to Egypt, sailing down the Nile, riding camels in the desert, going to visit the Native American Indians on their reservations. And I also put on the list to swim with dolphins in Hawaii. And then I thought, well, that's ridiculous. How can I possibly do that? I can't afford to do that. So that didn't work for me. And then it occurred to me, because I was renting at Whale Beach, I had to, all my money went with rent and looking after myself and so on. I did happen to own a home in northern New South Wales, like in the bush up in Mullumbimby, and I had bought that home a long time ago for my old age so that I'd have some sort of security and money. But it was about to be relet. The current tenants were about to go. And I thought, my God, if I sold that house, I could actually manifest my dreams. And then the other part of me said, now, don't be ridiculous. That's just your security in old age. But I sort of ignored it and went with the idea of excitement because it excited me so much to think of getting away and doing the things I wanted. So I rang the estate agent, and he quite happily sold the house. And with the money that I got from selling the house, I spent it, or I decided I'll spend it in going to Egypt and to go to North America. So basically, that was the start of my new life. I went to Egypt, and I just, it was like going onto a different planet. It wasn't just going to the beautiful temples and riding the camels in the desert and so on. I just loved to mix with the people in the markets and get to know them. And there's a couple of photos that haven't come up yet. Oh, that's the one of me in 1963 with Mum. That was my first taste of Egypt. So I'm sorry about this, but if we could go on to the next slide. And I went down the Nile. I became friends with some of the people that lived in these mud huts. And could we move to the next slide, please? And as I said, I loved mixing with the people in the markets. And there's a couple of funny stories. With this story here, this is a real crocodile I was holding. And the guy said to me, buy this crocodile. It's a very important crocodile. He said, I'm a cousin of Paul Hogan. That was his crocodile. And so I knew how ridiculous that was, but of course, I didn't buy the crocodile. Imagine taking it back on the plane to Australia. And then I made friends with other people. This particular man asked me to marry him. But of course, he promised all sorts of wonderful things if I was to marry him, but of course I couldn't. But all of these experiences were so different from my experiences at home. And I sort of was coming out of myself. I wasn't this sort of, felt as if I was becoming in touch with the real me. So I went back to Australia after that. I do have photos a little later on of my experiences with the Native American Indians. But first of all, I returned to Australia. And then I realised I had blown all my money, so I didn't have any money for my old age, and I certainly didn't have money to be able to go back to where I wanted to be again, to revisit Egypt and so on. So I sort of took pleasure in writing articles about my experiences, and these articles became published in magazines. So I was sort of thrilled at getting the articles published and the accompanying photos and so on. Then one day, and then one night I had this dream, and you know how sometimes you can have some dreams that are very, very vivid? They're almost more physical than physical. And in this dream, all it was a lovely woman with long blonde hair saying to me, "Don't worry, you will go back to Egypt. I'll pay your airfares." And that was all that I could remember in the dream when I woke up. But I wrote it down in my dream diary, and I made sure I wrote the words, "I will pay for your airfares," but not for any particular reason. It was just a dream that stuck with me. Anyway, sometime later, I got a phone call from from a travel agent in Queensland, and she introduced herself as Ginny Salo. And she said, "I've been reading your articles and I want to start creating groups to go to places like Egypt and the Native American reservations with somebody who could take them there and conduct meditations in special places there. And I want them to be spiritual tours, not the normal commercial tourists groups that go. Would you be willing to do it?" And I thought, oh, what do you think my answer would be? And I said, "Of course." I said, "But I would love to do it, but I wouldn't be able to pay for my fares or anything like that. I don't have any money." And she said, "No." She said, "I'll pay for your airfares. I'll pay for your board, everything, your hotel stays, your food, absolutely everything. You'll be paid as the person who takes these people." And I couldn't believe it. So the time started to come. And she had organised a group of 13 people who all wanted to do this. And I lived in Sydney. She lived in Queensland, and most of the people going were from Sydney. So she said, I'll fly down and meet you at the airport to see you off, so you'll be okay, because I hadn't done something like this before. And when we had to meet up, there she was, the lady with the long blonde hair that was in my dream, exactly as she was, Ginny Salo. And I found that dream, I've never forgotten that dream, because it was one of those incredible dreams that came true. So anyway, that started me taking these groups to Egypt and so on. And it started to change my life completely. It convinced me that we can change our lives. I had gone from this person in Sydney that had done nothing but work and look after other people, and no social life, no money, to doing these things. So yeah, this is now me with the groups. And one of the things we used to do was go to the pyramids, of course, by camels. And I'd like to tell you a little story that happened. You can see right here where it happened. It was closer to the pyramids. There were a lot of people there. And this little boy came up to me, and because there are thousands of children begging for money all the time, and he came up and was begging for money. And I had just bought, this was my first trip with the group, and so I had just bought at the Sydney airport a digital camera, and I wasn't used to using digital cameras, and I was wanting to take photos. And I said to the little boy, "Could you hold on a minute? I'll give you some money, and if you have your photo taken with me." And so he was really happy. He waited, but I couldn't fix my camera. And one of the people who were with me, they tried to help me fix the camera, and I couldn't do it. And I kept saying to the little boy, "Just hang on," until in the end I saw him crying, and I noticed for the first time his hand had been chopped off, or he had no hand. And knowing that back in those days, very often parents would do something like that to make tourists more pitiful towards it, gaining more pity for their children if they saw the children there was something wrong with them. So I noticed in horror that he had one hand off. He was crying. I turned away again to just be sure that the camera was right. When I turned back to take the photo, he'd disappeared. And I went everywhere to look for him. I couldn't find him anywhere, and I felt absolutely terrible. And that time, leaving the pyramids that day, I was very upset, and the person who was driving the bus asked me why. I told him why. I said that I had let a little boy down, and obviously he needed the money. And he said, "Don't worry, I can find him for you. And I saw how, and he had his mobile phone. I said, you got to ring him up. And just joking. And he said, no, just a moment. And he rang and he contacted an elder of the village of Giza and told him the story, because he said he thinks he would know this family because the boys had been gone. And sure enough, the guy said if we were to meet him that afternoon at 5 o'clock or in the evening sometime, I can't remember now, we could meet his mother and him, and I can hand the money over. So what happened was that we did go, and I was able to see his mother. The little boy couldn't stay long. He was running away from the police, but I was able to give him the money and the money to the mother. And I took a photo of her because I wanted to remember this. And of course, I had taken the photo of the boy. So that was the beginning of a story, which has an ending later in my story. So I took the photo of the mother, I was able to give money to the boy, and that was that. And we continued our journey through Egypt. One of the things that Ginny Salo was able to do, which most tourists couldn't really normally do, she paid a lot of money for us to be able to do this, was to be able to go inside the Great Pyramid, up into the King's Chamber, and meditate in the middle of the night, which is something that just other people couldn't do. So it was a thrill to be able to do that. This is just a photo of one of the group members who chose not to sit out on the floor of the King's Chamber. He wanted to lie inside the sarcophagus to do his meditation. I managed to get a photo of that, so that was good. And we did lots of many things. And at night we would do meditating and praying for world peace and so on at the site of the pyramids and the Sphinx. We did that sort of thing, which was terrific. Yes, at sunset we would ride through the desert and meditate at the pyramids. And we did a lot of meditating at the temples. And this is the Temple of Isis where we meditated. And I loved doing that. That was another thing. And a lot of the people had been like me. They had been leading lives that they seemed as if they were just locked into and would be forever. And so they really loved doing all of this too. My favourite place was the Valley of the Kings. This is actually near the Valley of the Kings. This is Queen Hatshepsut's temple. But a lot of my personal feelings of change and expansion happened here at the Valley of the Kings. We were allowed to go into King Tut's tomb to meditate, and inside the tomb of Ramses II, which was sort of underground. And a lot of these meditations were in these incredible places, and we were so lucky. So we went to a lot of the temples to meditate. Every now and again we'd be exhausted, and this is just a photo of us chilling out at the Luxor temple after we'd been meditating, and we were just relaxing. Another place was the Sacred Lake at Luxor, and we'd go there both day and night to meditate, and people would just love this area. It was absolutely beautiful. Now, I'd just like to go on to the next tape. This was the original photo I took when I was trying to fix my camera, and I fixed it, and we took the photo, and then the camera broke down, and I focused on trying to fix the camera again so I could take a second photo instead of giving him the money. I should have given the money after the first photo. That is the first photo, and that's Ahmed. So that's just a picture of what he looked like. It was the photo taken, which I didn't pay for. So what I'd like to do now is tell you something else. I went on to take a group to North America, to the Native American Indians and so on. And then, of course, we did another group to Egypt. We did a group to the jungles of Mexico. And we did more and more tapes such as that. 10 years later, I was still taking groups. So that's how much my life changed. Now, I'm wanting to emphasize the fact that 10 years later, at a visit to Egypt, what happened was that I wanted to, one day, it was a free day and everybody was either taking photos or going to do their shopping. I went to a papyrus gallery to buy some papyri, and I spoke a lot with Adam, who, pardon me, ran the papyrus gallery. And they bought papyrus and then left him. And I thought, I'd love to be able to, because this was the hotel was right near the village, the Giza village, the small, very primitive village where Ahmed had lived. And so I thought I'd love to, wish I could track Ahmed down, but it seemed ridiculous. It was 10 years later and it's thousands of people living. And I kept going towards the village, past lots of policemen and military men who were on the streets. But once I got into the village, the military weren't there, because this is where all the native Egyptians lived. And I thought, I got lost, and I thought this was a ridiculous idea. I could never track Ahmed down. So I was wandering around trying to work out how to get back. And suddenly somebody said, "Hi, Joe, what are you doing here?" And I turned around and it was Adam from the Papyrus Gallery. And I told him the story and he said, "Oh, just hang on a sec." And he started to take me towards somewhere. And it ended up being close. We bumped into somebody who knew Ahmed's family. But now the father had died when they were children. They'd never known him. The mother had died recently. And so Ahmed, who you can see now, which is 10 years later, he was about 18. He was about 8 before. He's now about 18. Lived with his brother, Imam, and they lived in a hut in one room. They slept on this couch thing and the floor. And so I was able to be taken to revisit him, and he actually remembered me, and it was great. And so I gave him more money, and I said how sorry I was they'd lost their mother. And I said, "Do you have photos of your mother?" And they said, "No, we don't have any photos or anything like that." And I said, "Well, the day that I met you and gave that money over to your mother, I took a photo of her. Would you like me to send you the photo?" And I couldn't, because there's no such thing as postal services at the village. But luckily, Adam was still with me, and he said, "If you email that photo of his mother, I can print it out at the Papyrus Gallery and I can come down to his hut and give it to him and his brother." So I thought, that would be a great thing. So anyway, I was really pleased about that and went back to my hotel that night, switched on my laptop computer, still feeling terrific about the fact that I'd be able to give the photo of the mother to Adam, so they would see a photo of their mother, who they'd lost such a long time ago and never had any memory of in the way of photos. I turned it on to my emails, and there was an email from my daughter Simone saying, "Happy Mother's Day, Mum." And I forgot that back in Australia it was Mother's Day. I didn't even think of it, but it was so lovely to get this Happy Mother's Day from my own daughter. And I thought, wow, this is weird that it should happen today. It's almost like an Egyptian mother in spirit orchestrated the whole thing, because here I'd organised for them to get this picture of their mother. And it was Mother's Day back in Australia, and I heard from my own daughter. And that was just one small incident that I love. This is when I started to take the people to Mexico. And this is at the temple. And this is the Chacmul. Back in the days, maidens would be sacrificed at this temple of the warriors. They'd take their hearts out and they'd be sacrificed here. And it was terrible history. But I did explore the temple and felt very, very sad about going to exactly where these places were. Spent quite a lot of time taking groups to these places, the temples and in Mexico and the jungles. This is in the Mexican jungle. Here I was able to overcome my fear of snakes, I'd always been terrified of snakes at home. And when I was here, you've always been forced to do things. They said, come and hold this snake, it won't hurt you. And so I held the snake, and it did help me to overcome my fear of snakes. And others in the group had the same fears, and they also held the snakes. We had all sorts of interesting, very interesting experiences that you could never have back in Australia. This is a photo of us in Monument Valley when I went to visit I took them to visit the Native American people, and we rode horses at Monument Valley, and we visited the reservations, and we were privileged to join in to some of the beautiful ceremonies the Native American Indians conducted. This is part of where I was staying. One time we went to it was at night, and we went to a mesa, and it was they had Kachina warriors that danced, and they danced in the hope of creating more corn to eat. But we weren't allowed underground where a lot of the ceremony was held. But I wandered a bit away from the group at the time, and three Hopi Indian boys came and said, you can come down the ladder with us and be at the ceremony. So to cut a long story short, they took me underground, and I was able to sit in on this ceremony in the pitch black. There were women and children sitting around. I felt like a complete intruder. And these Kachina dancers were dancing with huge grotesque masks on in the hope of creating corn. Also, I just want to talk about another incident that occurred, if that's okay. During one of those trips to the Native American reservations, I had a dream. I was at the hotel, and I had another one of those incredible dreams. And in the dream, I was being faced by this beautiful woman, and she was dressed all in white, and she glowed with white light, and she was absolutely beautiful. And I can't remember anything she might have said, but I can just remember that she was dressed in white, she glowed white, and she was like somebody who wasn't normal, a normal human being. And it was one of those dreams that stick with you, which I just couldn't get rid of. And the next day I spoke to somebody, Dan, who was a Sedona local, and I told him about the dream. I said, if I could describe the energy, it'd be like as if it was Mother Mary coming, but as if Mother Mary would visit me. You know, that's stupid. But it was that type of person, very special. And I described again, he said, well, it sounds like the white buffalo calf woman who a long time ago, many hundreds of years ago, saved the lives of thousands of Native American Indians who were so poor they had nothing. And she produced hundreds of buffalo so that they could earn some sort of a living from these buffalo. She brought them all along. They were so grateful to her, and she's gone down in history as the white buffalo calf woman, because when she disappeared, she turned into a white calf and she disappeared. So she'd always been called in history the white buffalo calf woman. He said, I think you saw her. And I thought, oh my God, yes, it could be her perhaps, but surely not. Why would she visit me? Why would I see her in a dream? And that was that. So anyway, a couple of days later, I was on the plane heading home back to Australia, and I was reading the newspaper, and I'll have to read this because I want you to know the exact words. I read there was an article, and it was in a newspaper called the USA Today, and the date was the 14th of September. The headline was, "Behold, a white buffalo miracle birth beckons Indians." And the article read, "A small miracle has transformed an unobtrusive farm here into a tourist mecca and turned life upside down along the Rock River. Thousands of tourists are flocking to Dave and Valerie Hyder's 3-acre buffalo farm, hoping to glimpse the shy miracle, which is a rare white female calf born and heralded by American Indians as a prophecy come true. In Native American law, a return of the white buffalo augurs revitalized times for tribes. Hundreds of Indians are making the pilgrimage to see the white buffalo. The historic legend goes that a woman in a shining white dress had appeared before the starving people hundreds of years ago and delivered a sacred pipe, taught them to pray, and told them about buffalo. She promised to return one day, and as she vanished, she turned into a white buffalo calf, and herds of buffalo arrived, ensuring food, shelter, clothing for the people. And the Plains Indians survived on the herds until the 1890s, when they were forced onto reservations and their buffalo were slaughtered. It also said, I didn't want to read the whole article, it's a lot. It says, Lakota Indian caretaker of the sacred white buffalo pipe said, people have been praying for the spirit of the buffalo to return. The arrival of this white calf today is a miracle. The return of the white buffalo calf woman. So after reading that in the newspaper just a couple of days after my dream, I thought that dream must have been the white buffalo calf woman. And of course, I've never forgotten it. It was an extremely wonderful experience. And when I got home from Australia, my life continued in that way, and until I turned 72. And I'd like to just finish off my talk with a quote from Mark Twain, which is, 20 years from now, you will be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than the ones you did. So throw off all bowlines, sail away from the safe harbour, explore, dream, discover. And I just feel that's good advice, because so often we just keep on with our lives and we have not done anything that we've been really wanted to do or been excited about. And I think that my message is from the book is that we can change our lives. We can do the things we do. If I hadn't, I took a huge risk selling my house to do it, but if I hadn't written the articles and Ginny hadn't read them, I wouldn't have been employed to take groups again for I think it was about 20 more times, doing the things I love to do. So I took a huge risk, and I'm glad I did. Basically, that's the basis of the story, of having the courage to change in order to follow your excitement and have your excitement change your life. Oh, here we are meditating at one of the pyramids in the Mayan jungle. It was part of our experiences. It was great. And so what were the other ones? Oh, yes, another thing that I did that I had always wanted to do was to visit my friend Paldon Jenkins in England, and for us to explore the crop circles. This was right back in the day when they had just started. And so it was just another extremely exciting experience that was a part of me selling my house and taking a risk. The next I think there's only one last. Oh, that's just me with Paldon's daughter Marika in the crop circle. So it was that's just another story, another example of doing something that you wouldn't normally do, taking a risk. Yeah. So it's just another part of me wanting to give the message that you can explore your own self and find out what excites you the most, and you can change your life if you feel that you're stuck in a rut.